In the first lesson of the Industrial Revolution, we looked at the causes of the revolution and why the Industrial Revolution occurred. In this lesson, we're going to look at the effects of the Industrial Revolution. Some of them will be positive and some of them will be negative. The big idea for this lesson is that the Industrial Revolution presented society with new and unique challenges. Unique challenges are challenges that society has not seen before. The essential questions for this lesson is: how did science and technology promote industrial growth? That would be industrial growth in factories, as well as in which ways did the Industrial Revolution change life in the cities? And in many ways, it changed life for the better and for the worse. The aim of the lesson is to describe how cities changed by 1900, and we're going to identify the positive and negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. Setting the stage for this lesson, the new industrial nations underwent social changes, such as rapid urbanization. Urbanization is the growth of cities. One cause of the Industrial Revolution was that peasants had lost their jobs on the farms, and they were forced to move from the farms to the cities, rural to urbanization. Men, women, and children worked long hours in difficult and dangerous conditions. By 1900, these conditions had begun to improve in many industrialized nations. The factory system produced huge quantities of new goods at lower prices than ever before. In time, ordinary workers were buying goods that in earlier days only the wealthy could afford. The demand for goods created jobs, as did the building of cities, railroads, and factories. Politics also changed as leaders had to meet the demands of an industrial society. One effect of the Industrial Revolution is going to be negative. As you can see in the picture entitled London Fog, this is fog caused by the many factories. So this would be the smoke coming out of the smokestacks of the factories, and it would cause, as you can see, polluted air. Charles Dickens, a favorite author, once said, "It was a foggy day of London, and the fog was heavy and dark. Animate, living in London," those would be the people living in London, "with smarting eyes and irritated lungs, was blinking, wheezing, and choking. Inanimate, non-living London," that would be non-living referring to the buildings, "was a sooty specter, divided in purpose between being visible and invisible, and so being wholly neither." So an effect of the Industrial Revolution would be environmental pollution, air pollution, irritated lungs, irritated eyes, and the buildings would get covered with dust and soot from the factories. So this would be a negative change of the Industrial Revolution. Another effect of the Industrial Revolution would be population growth. As we discussed, with changes in farming in the Agrarian Revolution, there was a rapid increase in population. As the Industrial Revolution continued, as you can see in the graph, population growth continues to increase. Another effect of the Industrial Revolution is how city life changed. As industrialization progressed, cities came to dominate the West. City life underwent dramatic changes in Europe and the United States. Growing wealth and industrialization changed the basic layout of European cities. City planners created spacious new squares and boulevards. So city planners are people that are planning to build a city before the buildings are built. This is a grid of Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, what is now known as Chelsea. You can see that at the bottom of your screen. And each rectangle will be a building. And this is how they planned cities, as city life went on, as the slide shows, had dramatic changes during the Industrial Revolution. Over the next couple of slides, I want you to take a look at a picture of Glasgow, Scotland. Glasgow is the largest city in Scotland, and over the next 3 slides, you're going to see from an agrarian society to industrialization how Glasgow has gone through dramatic change. People moved from small villages to the towns and cities where factories were located. Once again, that is called urbanization. Conditions were very bad, with working class people living in crowded buildings. Without a sewage or sanitation system, garbage rotted in the streets and disease spread. So once again, this would be a negative effect of the Industrial Revolution. Families, working class people living in crowding buildings and apartments. Imagine living in a small apartment with many families without proper running water, sewage, sanitation system, and even when you threw the garbage out onto the street, the garbage would just sit there and rot. So you can imagine what life would be like in a crowded city. The next slide is going to show a change in Glasgow, Scotland. So it goes from a nice farmland to smokestacks and a factory. The next slide again is showing great change in Glasgow. And the next slide will show what Glasgow looks like today as a modern city. It's hard to believe from the first picture to the last the change that this city has undertaken. Now we're going to look at the urban conditions. Anytime you see the word urban, we're talking about city life. And city life during the Industrial Revolution will always be bad. It's negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. In this picture, you can see how all the buildings are built on top of each other. Multiple families, again, living together in these dwellings. And urban life in the cities during the Industrial Revolution was not good. The next slide is going to look at specific conditions or effects of the revolution. First would be no central planning. That would be building codes, inadequate housing. Anytime a building goes up in a city today, there are rules that architects and builders have to follow. During this time, people just built buildings whether they were safe or not. So that means no central planning. People lacked education, police protection, and sanitation. Sanitation is garbage. Cholera, epidemic, and slums. Cholera is a disease that we're going to look at in a video in class where garbage ended up in the drinking water, and as a result, men, women, and children all got very sick. As you can see what the life expectancy was, 17 years for if you were working class. 17 years old. Long work schedule, 14 hours a day and 6 days a week. Class tensions and violence. Class tensions is referring to, very simply, rich, middle class, and the poor. Obviously, if you're at the bottom of the triangle, that social hierarchy, you're not going to appreciate the fact that you're working 14 hours a day. Maybe members of your family are getting sick from bad drinking water, lack of food, where there are wealthy factory owners enjoying the fruits of your labor. And another effect of the Industrial Revolution is going to be a high cost of living. Even though you might have many families crammed into these small apartments, it was still very expensive because you weren't earning a lot of money at the factories. As a result of all of the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution, we had someone named Frederick Engels. Okay, so in 1845, Frederick Engels, a radical socialist philosopher, someone that is radical, wants extreme change. He wrote about the effects of industrialization on the British working class. The book he wrote was The Condition of the Working Class in England, and he said, "The way in which the vast mass of the poor are treated by modern society is truly scandalous. They are housed in the worst ventilated districts in town, deprived of all proper means of refuse disposal, which would be garbage, and so they are forced to pollute the very districts they inhabit." So he is talking about that, again, there was no sanitation and people were just throwing their garbage into the street, polluting the neighborhoods that they lived in. There is no end to the sufferings which are heaped on the heads of the poor. Another effect of the Industrial Revolution is tenement housing. In the worst tenements, whole families were often crammed into a single room. Unemployment or illness meant lost wages that could ruin a family. High rates of crime and alcoholism were a constant curse. So this is a picture of Many people living in a small room in New York City in the 1850s. Tenement housing existed in England, New York City, as other places that were industrialized. Manchester is a city in England. We're going to watch a video about Manchester and the cholera epidemic that broke out due to the water that you even see in this picture was contaminated by the sewage and the garbage that was dumped into the water, and people drank and bathed in the water, and children and adults got very sick and died at an early age. Working conditions. Factory work hours were long. Men, women, and even children worked 12 to 16 hours a day. Mass production methods led to work that was boring and very dangerous. Well, with children working in factories, you have to certainly think about the effects of child labor. Imagine being put to work at 5 or 6 years old, working in, as the pictures on the right will show, children working in mines, as well as children working in a factory. Here is a child climbing under a clothing loom that makes textiles or clothing. Children were used to squeeze under these machines to help clean them. This was extremely dangerous, as children could be easily injured. Also, ventilation in the factory was not adequate, and you would also see a lot of lung diseases from everyone that worked in the factories. Here is a child feeding coal or iron ore into a furnace. As you can see in the picture, she's not wearing any shoes. And imagine breathing in the fumes that the furnace produces day in and day out. The life expectancy for a child working under these conditions would not be long. As a result of child labor and the problems it caused, Michael Sadler wrote the Sadler Report. On March 16, 1831, Michael Sadler attempted to introduce legislation, or he tried to pass laws, in order to limit a child's workday under the age of 18 to 10 hours a day. He described in his own words the suffering that many children were facing in the factories, but members of the parliament still refused to pass the bill. This bill involved the following: a ban on labor for children 9 years old and younger. So that meant if you were 10, you can work. A 10-hour workday for people aged 9 to 18. Time in the day included for meals. 2 hours of free time on Saturdays. Saturday was considered a workday. A ban on working all night for children under the age of 21. Children were expected to work all night. Even though this bill was rejected. Yes, this bill was rejected, believe it or not. It did lead to members agreeing to look into the issue one more time. So even with all the problems with child labor, this bill still was not passed. The Sadler Report is a question that will often come up on a Regents. Labor unions. So labor unions would actually be a positive effect. We've really been focusing on a lot of the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. Labor unions is a positive effect. By the 1800s, workers in the same occupation, meaning people had the same job as you, teachers would get together, police officers would get together, and they began to join together and form an organization for reform or change. Unions engage in collective bargaining with their employers, negotiating for higher pay and better working conditions. Workers would strike or refuse to work if employers refused their demands. Labor unions contributed to improved wages, hours, and conditions for workers. So labor unions would protect the rights for workers. Labor unions still exist today, and they still function as they did when they first existed. So let's look at a little review on some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution. First one would be urbanization, or the growth of cities. Second would be child labor. Third would be dangerous working conditions. And four would be the formation of labor unions. So let's look into some more positive effects of the Industrial Revolution. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, you had advances in transportation. The growth of industry led to improvements in transportation. Roads and canals were built and improved. The steam locomotive was invented. Railroads grew, and steam engines powered ships at sea. More advances in transportation. Carl Benz, three-wheeled automobile, and the four-wheeled automobile. If you look at his last name, Benz, this is Mercedes-Benz. Henry Ford also invented the automobile. Airplanes and communications. We all know about the Wright brothers. The first recorded flight of a plane was achieved by the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk in 1903. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone. In 1901, Guglielmo Marconi received a transatlantic radio message on his invention, the radio. Medicine caused a rise in population with an improvement in medicine and science and healthcare. People were living longer, so you would have a rise in population. Florence Nightingale founded the first nursing school, and the use of sanitary measures in hospital. Sanitary refers to cleanliness. Louis Pasteur proved germ theory that certain microbes might cause specific infectious diseases. Created vaccinations in the process of pasteurization. Joseph Lister emphasized antiseptic prevention and the sterilization or cleaning of medical instruments. If you look at his last name, Lister, mouthwash, Listerine. Robert Koch identified bacterium that could cause the spread of pandemic tuberculosis. The next effect of the Industrial Revolution is the rise in the standards of living of the people that were working in the factories and living in the cities. The standards of living for workers improved, and this takes a long time for the improvement to be felt by the people living in the cities. The standard of living measures the quality and availability of necessities and comforts in a society. Families ate more varied diets, lived in better homes, and dressed in inexpensive, mass-produced clothing. There were advances in medicine, which also improved health. Some workers moved to the suburbs, traveling to work on subways and trolleys. Other results of industrialization or effects would be demand for mass-produced goods. New factories opened, which in turn created more jobs. Wages or pay rose so that workers had enough left after paying rent and buying food to buy a newspaper or visit a music hall to see a concert. As the cost of railroad travel fell, people could visit family in other towns. Now a review question. How did industrialization change the face of cities? Remember, there are positive and negative effects of industrialization. With industrialization came more jobs, urbanization or the growth of cities, better sanitation and entertainment, but it also created slum conditions and higher crime rates. Before you close out this lesson, please take a look at, again, the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution. Some of the effects are immediately felt, like the rise of factories, changes in transportation, urbanization, and some of the effects are long-term, meaning it takes a number of years for these effects to take place. Growth of labor unions, inexpensive new products, increased pollution. This is a very important chart that would help you answer many questions on the Industrial Revolution as well as writing an essay. Please go to Google Classroom and look at the assignment that will be there that you need to complete referring to this lesson.